The state of Pennsylvania's fiscal house, up next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center of Public Policy, and I'm joined, as usual, by Maura Donnelly, an associate for Susquehanna Valley Center, and is co-hosting with me today. Maura, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
How's your balance on your checkbook, Maura?
Oh, it's pretty pathetic right now.
Is it really? It's something we have in common. And I think that most Pennsylvanians, when we turn and we look at the state's checkbook and the balance on that, that looks pretty precarious as well.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to bring someone in today to help us understand this. Someone who understands this perhaps better than most and can put it in layman's terms. So therefore, we're turning to you, Dave. We're bringing in Dave Patti, who is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be with you both again.
So nice to have you back again. Why, we hear from the governor, and we hear from the governor's staff over and over again that when it comes to state fiscal health, that Pennsylvania at least is not in as bad shape as many of the other states in the Northeast, and we should be happy about that. Yeah. How do you look upon that particular assessment?
I understand their vantage point, but it is the proverbial damning with faint praise. There are a lot of states that are in bad shape. Pennsylvania went into this recession at a more shallow dive than some of the other states, and we're coming out a little better than some of the other states. In part because our economy went through such an upheaval in the 80s that we kind of right-sized our economy, we diversified our economy, and I think we're stronger, whereas, for instance, California was still so much aerospace and all their eggs in one basket. Pennsylvania got out of the steel industry as being the predominant driver of our economy 25 years ago. And so today with this recession, as a state and as employers, we were somewhat less affected. Still certainly painful for those who lost their jobs. But that also meant then state revenues were somewhat less affected, that we lost tax dollars in a tremendous level, but again, not as badly as some other states.
Well, then you open up the paper and you see that there's looming big problems coming, even despite the fact that we're doing better than some of the other states. We've got some significant issues coming and facing our state budget in Pennsylvania.
Right, there are some issues that are recession related, and one of those for the state budget that lawmakers are certainly grappling with is that we have balanced our budget last year and this coming fiscal year with $2 billion from the federal stimulus program. That will go away in the future, and is a problem. Because of the extension of unemployment benefits and the number of people being unemployed increasing over the last year and a half, we are in debt to the federal government by $2 billion, and that's growing by almost $100 million a week right now. So you have those issues, but then as I guess you're alluding to as well, then we have some homegrown problems, not related to the recession, or not directly related initially to the recession, in the pension crisis.
Compounded by the recession.
Compounded, certainly, made worse by the decline in market value of all of our assets in the pension portfolios. So that's a problem. And then there's transit issues, mass transit, highway infrastructure money. There are enough challenges out there for whoever becomes the next governor.
Certainly the weather's been a challenge this particular season. And you find that just this week we've heard that the governor, who has no money, called up the president, who has no money, and asked him for money for the state of Pennsylvania to deal with the huge costs that we had for snow removal. I don't know that we've received an answer yet, but when we contact the federal government to ask them for money that we use to move snow around, is that indicative of a crisis state?
Well, the governor doesn't have the money on hand. The president gets to print it. So, so in Washington, they have a little easier. And I think what the governor is doing, what other state governors are doing, is they're looking for everything they can do. Obviously, they're raiding every cookie jar they can. And right now, we have in Washington an administration and a Congress that would like to make the handouts, because frankly I believe it's part of their political strategy to make state governments and municipal governments more dependent upon Washington. more willing to take all of the strings that go with all of that money. But also, it's certainly a realization that while it falls heavily on the states, things like snow removal, it falls just as heavily, if not more so, on local governments. And our local governments are strapped. Our local governments have suffered for 20, 30 years of unfunded mandates from the federal and state government. They have very few resources in terms of their taxing authority, mostly property tax. We understand certainly their political dilemma, the hue and cry always about property taxes in Pennsylvania. And so if they budget a certain amount for salt and overtime and snow removal and exceed that, that means taking money away from police budgets or human services budgets or road maintenance budgets. And so certainly I'm sure that the governor heard from our local government leaders, the mayors of the cities, the township supervisors and commissioners, borough managers saying, we need help.
Well, it would seem that after last year's budget, 100 and some plus days late, that everyone seems pretty determined to get it passed on time this year.
Right.
I'm not going to ask you whether you think that's possible or not, given the challenges we're discussing here today, but the governor does seem pretty intent on finding some solutions to some of these problems that might be facing the next governor,
right.
One of which is an expansion of the sales tax. And I know from past experience that that dramatically impacts small businesses especially.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you feel about that?
Governor Rendell had suggested in his February budget address to the joint session of the legislature that we should deal with this pension crisis, which is something we can talk about. I mean, it could be billions of dollars. The loss of the federal stimulus money. And he said, what he'd like to start doing is imposing some new taxes, make some tax changes that widen the base on a couple of our taxes, sales tax, but also the corporate net income tax. So that he will bring in new revenues. He'd like to put them in a lockbox for a year or two, which I only trust a lockbox when I'm the one with a key.
Yeah.
But he'd like to put it in a lockbox to be used by future governors. Supposedly, it wouldn't be used by his administration, but when he's gone.
Very thoughtful.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And I suspect that while they may not say it publicly, everybody who's running for governor probably hopes he's successful.
I would imagine
in getting this. But you're right. You point out that in sales tax, what he's proposing in sales tax is eliminating virtually all the exemptions. Everyone knows you don't pay tax on food that's for taking home and cooking. You don't pay it on most clothing. We think of the tax as being on luxury items right now.
Well, before we go to that, though, Dave, can we go back and sort of explore a little bit further that other problem of unfunded pension obligations? That one of the problems there certainly was Tom Ridge. Before he left, it seemed that the budget was in good shape as Tom Ridge was leaving office. And so to show his goodwill, he decided to increase the pensions for everyone as he left office, so that he'd leave on a wave of good feeling, and that was okay at the time because we had the money. But looking down the hallway for a little bit, and you find that if there are economic hard times, that was going to be tough to deal with. And now we're having to pay the piper right now, aren't we? Can we go back and at least maybe for new state hires do away with that increase that Tom Ridge gave folks when he left office, Dave?
Well,
how can we handle that? Is it a problem?
And the increase there was twofold. One was there was a COLA, but also then with the multiplier. Then we take every year of service, and then we now multiply it by 2.5%, and it had been lower. Can we go back to that? For new employees, I think the case law is clear that you can do pretty much anything you want with new hires. There is case law that says you can't change the deal going forward for people who are already in the system. Now, certainly people in the private sector were hired under certain conditions and saw things change over years, including people who are unionized in the private sector.
Losing their pensions
losing
completely.
pensions
Yeah.
and things like that.